समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code. But first, an appeal. Viewers like you have been instrumental in sustaining the quality of ground reportage and granular analysis we do at ThePrint. But keeping up this quality of journalism needs money, and that means the support of viewers and readers like you. I appeal to you to take a subscription to ThePrint, for which you'll find detailed instructions in the link below. 48 hours, Defence Minister George Fernandes confidently proclaimed to the nation. The intruders will be evicted in 48 hours. The previous night, the 14th of May 1999, Captain Saurabh Kalia and 5 soldiers, Arjun Ram, Bhavar Lal, Bhika Ram, Moola Ram and Naresh Singh, had disappeared on their way up the Kaksar river to Bajrang post on the line of control. Their bodies were returned weeks later bearing evidence of horrible torture, cigarette burns, fractures, amputated genitalia. Even though commanders across the Kargil sector were reporting that their troops were being fired on from Mashko to Dras to Batalik and the gates of the Siachen glacier, their generals lined up behind the minister. There was no concentration of troops on the Pakistani side and no battle indicators of war or even limited skirmishes. Then 15 Corps Commander Lieutenant General Kishanpal told Unified Headquarters in Srinagar on the 24th of May 1999. The situation, he said, was local and would be defeated locally. Last week, Chief of Defence Staff General Anil Chauhan made the courageous decision to tell a nation in denial that India had lost combat jets on the first night of the 100-hour war with Pakistan. Why they were down, what mistakes were made, that is important, he explained. Those errors, General Chauhan went on, were examined during a 48-hour pause in Indian Air Force offensive operations before it resumed its long-range strikes. Even if there's been needless coyness in matters of detail, the importance of this truth-telling cannot be overstated. Last week, 6 decades ago, the All Jammu and Kashmir Muslim Conference, then the largest political party in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, called on citizens to join the army of Razakars, who were preparing a guerrilla campaign to seize Kashmir from India. The government of so-called Azad Kashmir ordered all men aged between 16 and 45 years to undergo military training. Local clerics openly called for jihad, new camps were set up to train volunteers, and units of Pakistan's Frontier Corps began to be moved into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir from the border with Afghanistan. Amazingly, no one in India seemed to hear the plain words being broadcast on loudspeakers across the ceasefire line, which is now known as the line of control. From the end of July 1965, 9 columns of irregulars and troops, each made up of several hundred men, made their way into the heart of Kashmir almost unnoticed. Later, Indian intelligence officers would learn that the guerrillas had been ordered to join the annual congregation to mark the death of the Sufi saint Sheikh Sayyid Abdul Qadir Jilani at Khanyar in Srinagar, scheduled for the 8th of August. Then they were to march with protesters who were to gather to protest the arrest of Kashmir's former Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah. They were to take over the airfield and radio station and proclaim a revolutionary council. This would be the signal for regular Pakistani troops to cross the ceasefire line to help this insurrection. There has never been an explanation, India's own official war history notes, and I quote, of how such a large number of men had managed to slip across the Indian borders supposed to be vigilantly guarded. Even on 2nd August 1965, the war history records, when a high-level conference was held at Srinagar to review the security arrangements on the ceasefire line, there was no inkling of the impending guerrilla invasion which would take place within 72 hours. Earlier that summer though, the Indian Army had begun to experience an unusual degree of fire from across the ceasefire line. Then on 16 May, an Indian outpost near Kargil came under direct attack. The army then discovered that Pakistani forces had occupied positions on Peak 13620, so named for its altitude in feet, as well as the adjoining Kala Pahad area. For the first time since the 1947-1948 war, the Indian Army responded with offensive operations, seizing Peak 13620 and a series of positions on the ridgeline over Kargil. Those positions were, however, returned to Pakistan on the 30th of June after an assurance from the United Nations Secretary General, General Uthant, about the safety of the Kargil-Srinagar highway. The Indian Army's outposts in Titwal, Uri, Mendhar, Poonch and Naushera continued to come under attack in coming weeks though, likely compelling soldiers to reduce patrolling along the passes across the ceasefire line. For commanders of the Pakistan Army, India's blindness and deafness must have seemed like a gift from God. Then Foreign Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the leading hawk in Field Marshal Ayub Khan's regime, had drawn up the plans in consultation with Foreign Secretary Aziz Ahmad and the commander of Pakistan Army Forces in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, Major General Akhtar Hussain Malik. The memoirs of the Pakistan Army's then chief, General Muhammad Musa, assert he was skeptical about the idea, concerned that it might lead to an all-out war. To General Musa's surprise, his divisional commander continued execution of the idea that he had shot down. He wrote, I quote, "The policymakers thwarted professional assessment and advice on a matter having grave military implications because of their miscalculation of the politico-strategic situation and the over-ambitiousness of a few individuals." Lieutenant General Gul Hassan Khan, Pakistan's last commander-in-chief, has suggested that these political tensions undermined the operation from the outset. The chief, General Musa, and the chief of General Staff, General Sher Bahadur, had from its inception viewed Operation Gibraltar, the attack, as a bastard child, General Gul Hassan Khan wrote, born out of the liaison between the foreign minister, that's Bhutto, and General Malik. Air Marshal Asghar Khan, Commander-in-Chief of the Pakistan Air Force from 1957 to 1965, has recorded that he was asked to assign a Kashmiri-speaking officer to run a radio station which was purported to be operating and broadcasting from Srinagar but was actually located at the racecourse grounds in Rawalpindi. The Air Marshal was promised a 24-hour heads-up before the infiltration operation began, but the chaotic organization of the attack meant he only learned about it after the event. Late on the afternoon of 5 August 1965, Gulmarg-based shepherd Muhammad Deen turned up at the local police station to report that he had run into a large number of armed Pakistanis. Troops were dispatched to surround the infiltrating column. There were further fire contacts that night in Titwal, Kupwada and Mendhar. The Salahuddin column, the largest of these groups, succeeded in pushing its way into 4 Srinagar suburbs though, and exchanging fire with Indian soldiers dispatched from the Badami Bagh cantonment. The Pakistani assault though soon began to stall because of its lack of local support and the absence of well-structured logistical backup. Major Farooq Ahmad, one of the participants, would later recall hiding among flea-infested animal herds as he fled ahead of Indian troops. The starving personnel of the Kargil column mutinied twice, while thousands simply packed up and returned home across the ceasefire line. Following its initial failure to detect the intrusion, the Indian Army began to push back, famously capturing key infiltration routes like the Haji Pir Pass and, for the second time, Peak 13620. The unravelling of the attempt to seize Kashmir led Pakistan's leadership to dither. At the end of August, military historian Shuja Nawaz has written, Field Marshal Ayub sent a missive to Bhutto asking him, I quote, to take such action that will defreeze the Kashmir problem, weaken Indian resolve, and bring her to the conference table without provoking a general war. General Gul Hassan knew this wasn't possible and begged for permission to launch Grand Slam, an offensive aimed at Akhnur and Chamb, which would eventually cut off the highway from the rest of India to Srinagar. Even though the Indian army had repeatedly war-gamed such an attack since at least 1956, Lieutenant General Harbaksh Singh recorded in his memoirs that the Pakistani offensive caught leaders completely off guard. He writes, and I quote, "The preparations made by Pakistan for this thrust could not be concealed," the official war history notes, and the United Nations observers had warned India of the impending attack. The warnings were probably not taken seriously, it says. To make things worse, the Indian Air Force, which had never been warned or consulted on the prospect of a war in Kashmir, ended up hitting the Indian Army's own armour and gun positions. Flailing Indian commanders, though, were saved by General Musa's inexplicable decision to relieve the successful General Akhtar Malik of his command mid-battle. Following the fall of Cham, the onward push to Jaudiya and eventually the highway spluttered and lost momentum. This gave India precious time to launch its own counter-offensive across the border in Punjab. India's 11th Corps secured initial success in its push towards Lahore, securing significant victories at the battles of Asal Uttar and Barki. There was a stalemate, however, in other key sectors like Dera Baba Nanak and Fazilka, while a Pakistani counter-offensive succeeded in capturing Khemkaran. For its part, the 1 Corps push towards Sialkot soon degenerated into what the official history describes as, I quote, a slogging match. Large-scale preemptive strikes on Indian air bases on the 6th of September by the Pakistan Air Force also succeeded in destroying several aircraft on the ground in Pathankot and Kalaikunda. These losses forced the Indian Air Force to commit a large part of its resources to combat air patrols, that is, patrols to protect its own bases, thus degrading the resources it had to support the Indian Army's push towards Lahore. 2 days before India and Pakistan agreed to a ceasefire, Ayub and Bhutto made a secret visit to Beijing to seek support from then Premier Zhou Enlai. The message from Zhou was probably less than reassuring. He said, I quote, "You must keep fighting even if you have to withdraw to the hills." A tired and worried Ayub instead took counsel from Musa and Air Marshal Noor Khan and decided not to prolong the fighting. Learning from the failures of 1965 helped India triumph in the Bangladesh War just 7 years later. But the absence of an institutional culture of relentless and open questioning meant some mistakes were soon to resurface. In 1988, India proved unable to prevent large-scale infiltration across the line of control, opening the way for the long jihad in Kashmir. Failures of generalship claimed a bitter toll of Indian soldiers' lives in Kargil, just as it had in 1965. And weaknesses in Indian air power, which were exposed in 2019, were largely hushed up, leading to the reverses General Chauhan has now underlined. Lessons can be learned through close examination of one's own errors, or they will be taught by the success of our enemies. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor at ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.